All right. So welcome back. Please write down today's guiding question and terms. This video lecture will go through all of that, so you should definitely know the definitions, which will definitely be on our test next time, and you should know the answer to the guiding question. All right. Now, let's see. So it looks like we are going to have quiz questions right now. So you'll want to have out any materials that you took notes on last time about the origins of Islam, the early Islamic world, the early Islamic community. Today's lecture is the last one before our test. So our test is going to be over the Byzantine Empire, the early Middle Ages, the origins of Islam, the spread of Islam, the Islamic world. Okay. And so here comes our quiz questions from last time. All right, now to move myself again, I feel like I'll be doing this a lot. Okay, so we are going to pick up with the Abbasid Caliphate. Okay, so the Abbasids were converts to Islam. They were Persian. They were Mawalis. Mawalis were non-Arab converts, and so they're going to take over the Islamic world in 750 after they defeat and massacre almost all of the Umayyads, but one Umayyad got away and sets up a caliphate over here in what's called Al-Andalus. Okay, it's usually referred to as the Cordoba Caliphate, and so the Abbasids will never control Spain. And so we have to understand, so Spain at this time will be ruled by Muslims. It is not a majority Muslim. In fact, there's about a third of the population will be Muslim. There's a large number of Christians there, and there's a large number of Jews located in Al-Andalus, but the Abbasids do not control that. Okay, so the Abbasid Caliphate will last from 750 until 1258, and that's when the Mongols show up and basically just destroy Baghdad, okay, which we'll talk about in just a second. So the Abbasids, okay, so like I mentioned, the Abbasids are Persian. So if we remember back to the Achaemenid Empire, which is a fancy name for saying the early Persians. So the Persians, even though they get conquered by Alexander the Great, they come back. Okay, the Persians always come back. They're like zombies, very successful zombies. But yes, so they're known for having these luxurious cities because the Silk Road's going to run through here. Okay, so these cities that definitely trade, that are pretty cosmopolitan, they will attract scientists and scholars, and we'll kind of be talking about that. Let's see here. So again, the Abbasid Caliphate is a combination of Arab and Persian cultures. So the early Islamic world were Arabs, okay, under the Umayyads. I mean, so Islam was not for non-Arabs. Does that make sense? But under the Abbasids, who are converts, they will actively seek out to convert people. And they will practice, they will ultimately, they will settle on Sunni Islam. Okay, so they will actually persecute Shias. Okay, and as I mentioned, the Abbasids never control the entire Muslim world. And actually, because they persecute Shias, you'll have different divisions within the Islamic world. The most notable will be in Egypt, the Fatimid dynasty. They will break away from the Abbasids. So even though the Abbasids control most of the Islamic world at the beginning, they will very quickly just start to lose land. So Islam will still be practiced, but that will just not be ruled by the Abbasids. Okay, all right. Okay, so it looks like I want to talk about real quick, just kind of hit on these things first. So social classes in the Islamic world. And just to stress, when I say the Islamic world, it is not just the Abbasid Caliphate. We have the Cordoba Caliphate, we have the Fatimid dynasty in Egypt, we have different Islamic groups across North Africa, and definitely Islam has spread to Central Asia along the Silk Roads. Okay, so within this Islamic world, okay, so the social classes, here we go. So the highest in society are those who are Muslims at birth. So you were born a Muslim. And even back, historically, if you go back through the Islamic, to the origins, it's whose family converted the first. Does that make sense? Who knew Muhammad? Okay, who were in his inner circle, and then who converted. Okay, so a way to rise in the ranks is to convert to Islam. So if you convert to Islam, that can raise your social status. And it can also lower your taxes, okay? Because all that you'll really have to pay is the zakat. However, one thing to mention about the Abbasids, like I mentioned, is they will actively seek out converts. And so whereas the Umayyads did not want people to convert because they wanted that tax base, which is the jizya, which is the tax on non-Muslims. So the Umayyads wanted that. The Abbasids, since they convert so many, they kind of lose the jizya. So there's still the zakat, which is the almsgiving that everyone pays. And so we'll start to experience like some commercial taxes. Does that make sense? Like taxes on commerce, modern concepts of taxes. Okay, and then who's third? So people of the book. So Christian, Jews, Zoroastrians. So these were protected peoples. They were called dhimmi. So the Muslims definitely viewed Christians and Jews and even Zoroastrians as having very similar beliefs. Like just like maybe they just had a few ideas kind of like warped. Okay, like they didn't get the pure version. And so, which isn't totally their fault, so we have to convert them. And so they were protected. Okay. And in some cases, they didn't pay the jizya. It kind of depended on where you were in the Islamic world. And then at the bottom, we have slaves. And so slaves in the Islamic world, typically, if your slave converted to Islam, you were supposed to free them. That didn't always happen, but it was customary. And so in the Islamic world, they will need slaves from outside the Islamic world. Does that make sense? And so they actually, a lot of them, they go to they get a lot of their slaves from Southeastern Europe, or Eastern Europe, I should say, like the Slavic lands. And I believe we've probably already mentioned that's actually like where the word slave comes from. So Slavic lands. Okay. And these slaves, again, it's very different than like the type of slavery that you would think of. While some might be agricultural workers, many were like household help. And in many cases, they actually intermarried with the family that they served, that owned them, and their children would not be slaves. And then we have a lot of slaves in the military. That's actually one thing about the Abbasids, is there will be this wave of Turkish migrants, so coming from Central Asia. Okay, around the year 800, right around the year 800, there's believed to be some like climactic change. And so a lot of Turks will migrate into the Islamic world and kind of take up that position as these like slave soldiers. Okay, they'll kind of start off as bodyguards for sons of the caliph and kind of work their way up to just being the military of the Islamic world. Okay, and so they are owned. And so the leader of these slave soldiers will be called a sultan. Okay, anyway, more information than I planned on giving you. Okay, so the role of women. So how are women treated in Islam? And this definitely changes over time. And depending on what region that you are in. If we go to the earliest examples of women in Islam, we have Khadijah, which was she was the wife of Muhammad, and she was fierce. So she was wealthy. She drew up a prenup. She was definitely a very influential woman in Muhammad's life, and he loved her till the day that she died. And then he will have other wives after she dies, but a very prominent one will be Aisha. And so she was a very powerful woman. In fact, she's going to write many of the hadith, which are stories about Muhammad. And so there's varying accounts of how women were treated. But one thing and just to add, like Muhammad was very respectful towards his wives. Okay. And in fact, many times, like there were cases where they would like dress him down in public. And so, it's very interesting to compare how the position of women changes over time as Islam moves from like a nomadic, semi-pastoralist area, okay, into civilization. And so it will become increasingly patriarchal as it comes in contact with these patriarchal civilizations. Okay, the concept of veiling, okay, this is introduced later. And again, in some areas it's stressed and in some areas it's not. And as Islam spreads, it's really not conservative at the beginning. Later that will change. So the role of women, the freedoms of women, I should say, will diminish over time. And I don't necessarily want to say that that's because of Islam. Okay? In fact, in many cases, like it will improve the position of women. It's really cultural influence on Islam in that region. Okay. All right. Now, so going back to the Abbasids. So the Abbasid capital is the city of Baghdad. And if we notice, we've learned about Constantinople. Okay. And so here, this is the city of Baghdad. So right by the Tigris River. And if you'll notice, again, we can see like how populated the city is. We can see that it's surrounded by walls, kind of like Constantinople. It's got a moat and it's not on like a peninsula. But if we notice, it has a much larger population. Okay. So the city of Baghdad had been pretty much the old Persian capital, the old Persian Ctesiphon capital. And so when the Persian Abbasids take over, they move the capital, which had been in Mecca, okay, and then it moved to Damascus, and they will move it to the city of Baghdad because it's on this trade route. Okay, and again, they're Persians, and so they're used to this city kind of being their capital. Now, something to mention, so the Hajj, this one of the 5 pillars of Islam, this yearly pilgrimage, will really help to diffuse ideas throughout the Islamic world. So if once a year Muslims meet in Mecca, okay, they will share ideas with one another. And so news from across the empire will spread thanks to the Hajj. And it's one way to kind of keep the Islamic world, even though it's breaking apart politically, it will keep it integrated culturally, okay, to some degree. All right. And so in Baghdad, you have this place called the House of Wisdom, which is not standing because the Mongols destroyed it completely. But at the House of Wisdom, you have all these texts that basically these scholars have brought to be translated into Arabic. And so these texts will be Greek, like Aristotle, works from Aristotle, Pythagoras, okay, Persian scientists, Egyptian scientists, Indian, so Aryabhatta, and even in some cases Roman. And so what's interesting is they will bring all of this together and all these scholars will converge, kind of like they did in Alexandria, but they will converge in Baghdad at the House of Wisdom and translate this into Arabic, which is interesting because actually Arabic is probably a language that would have died out had it not been for Islam, okay, because it doesn't have any vowels. And so, well, at least the original version didn't. And so what's interesting is so Arabic becomes this language of learning because they've got to translate everything. And it's really cool, like in some cases, like they would like take like these old texts of Aristotle and they would like doodle on the side, like in Arabic, which is kind of cute. One of these cute little things. Okay. People will probably like die now, like don't doodle on Aristotle. All right. And so speaking of the Greeks, okay, so the Greeks were well known for logical reasoning. If we think, I mean, they were the Pythagoras, Archimedes, Eratosthenes, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, like they just thought, sit around and again, they thought about like mankind can figure out anything if we put our brains to it. And while the Arabs were like, wow, man, these Greeks were so smart, but I wonder, why didn't they ever test any of this out? You know, like, why don't we like, you know, like, why don't they actually test, like experiment with these? And so that's actually something that the Muslims add to this learning. They test out these theories, okay? And so they create so the scientific method, the idea that you have an idea and then you test it out and you ultimately come up with a conclusion. So this is really born in the Islamic world. Okay. And then they add to this, obviously, these science and mathematics, astronomy, medical theory, but specifically the study of algebra. Okay. So algebra is from the Muslim world and trigonometry. Okay. And then the first concepts of germs. Okay. That you want to quarantine people who are sick. And so these are obviously the basis of the hospital today. And we are definitely familiar with the term quarantining and germs today. But so these first come about in the Islamic world and actually at the House of Wisdom. Okay, the study of optics, Ibn al-Haytham drew this. So basically like how the eye works, like how do we see things? And so it was the first real study of optics and the human eye. Also Arabic numerals. So the numbers that we use, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like the written numbers. So we call them Arabic numerals because they come to Europe via Arabs, if that makes sense. But actually they didn't originate in Arabia. They didn't originate at the House of Wisdom. They actually originated in India. Okay, sometimes they're called Hindi or Hindu numerals. Okay, but yes, so that you have to understand, like in Europe, they're still, for those who can read and write, they're still using Roman numerals, which if you've ever tried to do a math problem with Roman numerals, it's a lot more difficult. You think math is hard now. Okay, so try it with those Roman numerals. Okay, and then next, the diffusion of paper. And so if we remember, paper is invented in Han, China. And so that's going to diffuse along the Silk Roads and make its way to Baghdad, where it will really help with learning and education to keep track of all these texts, okay, and to translate. And then eventually that will diffuse into Europe, okay? All right. And then, so another area of study would be in astronomy, okay? And so one reason that astronomy will be so successful in the Islamic world, like obviously they're inheriting great knowledge from the Egyptians, from the ancient Mesopotamians, right, from the Indians. But all all Muslims need to know where Mecca is, because 5 times a day they need to pray towards it. And so they want to get this right. Okay. And also Muhammad encouraged learning. He wanted Muslims to be well educated. He himself was illiterate. Okay. But he encouraged his, fellow Muslims to learn. Okay. They were surrounded by these amazing empires, who were so successful. And so he didn't, but also Arabs, Muslims did not want to mess anything up. Does that make sense? So when they conquered people, they went and took in all these texts and kept them. Does that make sense? We're not going to mess these up. And then they wanted to translate them and make sure that they got everything right. So just kind of bringing all of this together. And then also, so Islam is very friendly to merchants. And this will be over land, but also over sea. And so this instrument here, the astrolabe, which was originally a Hellenistic invention, which will really be used by Muslim merchants, which will help them navigate, the waters. And so this really kind of helps them know where they are. Okay. All right. So we can kind of see the Islamic world is a very successful world. Definitely, surpassing medieval Europe, but rivaling or surpassing the Byzantine Empire. Okay, and something to mention about Muslim art, you should not have images of people. It's very close. I mean, if we talk about Islam being monotheistic and being extremely monotheistic, the concept of the Trinity would be blasphemy. For Muslims. So for Christians, if you are not supposed to worship idols, we don't even want to draw them in the Islamic world. Does that make sense? And so instead, they use kind of these geometric patterns. Sometimes this is called Arabesque, Arab-like, or beautiful calligraphy. We obviously see calligraphy not just in the Islamic world, but this is how they'll decorate religious structures. And it's not all Muslim works of art do not have humans, but anything religious. Okay. So in a mosque, you don't want to have a picture of a human. It's not always the case, but you don't want that. And so this is a mosque in Damascus. And so hopefully we could spot this. They're very easy to spot, Muslim architecture, even though it will vary. But these right here are called minarets. So we can see kind of the domed mosque with the minarets. Okay, and that's very important. Okay, we learned about the Hagia Sophia becoming a mosque. It already had the dome. And so then they just added the minarets in the years that followed. So this is another example of a mosque, but this is in Persia. And so in Persia, if you can tell, you can kind of see they really like those blue tiles, and you can see that, those geometric patterns, okay? And just so you could spot this, isn't it beautiful? It's just so beautiful. Usually these big open courtyards for people to gather, but then you can see what it's like on the inside, very intricate. Okay. And then, so this, remember we mentioned the Cordoba Caliphate is not run by the Abbasids. Okay. And it's like we mentioned, it's ruled by Muslims, but they're only 1/3 of the population. So this is the great mosque in Cordoba. So beautiful. But we can see it's quite different from the interior of the one in Persia. And this is its exterior here. So mosques will vary based on where they are in the Islamic world, just like Islamic practices will vary based on where where you are in the Muslim world, just like Christianity will vary based on where you are in the Christian world, and Buddhism, okay, the universal faiths. Okay, so we are moving to a new part of the Islamic world. So around the year 1000, okay, we know, we don't have a lot of written texts, but we know that Ghana, which is one of your terms, we know that they will be the first true Muslim state in West Africa. Okay, and so by the year 1000, we know that Islam has made its way to West Africa. And so it's going to make its way to West Africa across these trade routes, okay, on these camel caravans. Let me move myself over here. Okay, camel caravans. So there are goods that are produced up here in North Africa or that come across the Mediterranean. And so in order to get them to West Africa, okay, these trade routes will develop. And obviously the camel and the camel saddle are going to be important for this. But one thing to mention, that these merchants coming across the desert are Muslim. Okay. And so they will bring Islam with them. They'll stop here and grab some salt. And one reason that they are coming over here to West Africa is because there are large deposits of gold down here. Sometimes in the future, we'll refer to this as the Gold Coast because there's so much gold that is produced here. Okay. And so obviously, there will be a great demand for gold. Okay. And so there will be a demand for a trade route. And again, as trade increases around the year 1000, Islam will diffuse. But something to mention about this, even though Islam diffuses into West Africa, it will never be the conservative type of Islam. It will always be a fusion of kind of pagan, African, animist traditions with Islamic practices and beliefs. And then also to mention, not everyone converts to Islam. Actually, very few convert. Kings will convert, nobles, merchants, scholars will arrive. So it will always be the faith of the elite, whereas the commoners will maintain their native traditional beliefs. And like I mentioned, even those that do convert, this is not a pure Islam at all. Not at all. Okay. And so that's the first West African trading state that adopts Islam. Move myself over here. All right. Okay. And so the state that follows Ghana, okay, like the next powerful state, there's three successor states. There's Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. And so they will be very similar. So Ghana, Mali, so this was Ghana. So this is Mali. So we can see it's a little larger and they control more of the Niger River. And this city right here, Timbuktu, will be very important. Okay. And so Mali will be another state, but they're very famous for a ruler that they had, Mansa Musa. Okay. And you're going to watch a video about Mansa Musa right now. Okay. So you just watched the video. That was odd to film. You just watched the video. And so we should have a question coming up here in just a second. Here's the question. Okay. And so one thing that's very important is after the reign of Mansa Musa, you have to understand in the Islamic world, this guy comes and spends all this gold. So they're like, what's going on over there in West Africa, right? Okay. We need to find out more about what's going on there. And so as a result of his Hajj, the Islamic world will incorporate West Africa into the Islamic world. And yes, there will be a trade in gold, but really a new trade in slaves. Okay. So because if you remember, not much of the population are Muslim, definitely not who they would get the slaves from. Does that make sense? And so that will be a new source of the slave trade, which will go across the Sahara. And one thing to mention, most of the slaves going across the Sahara are women and children. Most of the men come from the Slavic lands, or they are Turks who have migrated. Okay. Kind of like these slave elites, which it sounds really weird to say that. Okay. So that was the kingdom of Mali. And then Mali will eventually be replaced, even though Mali does go on to exist, but the next powerful state will be Songhai. And so if we notice, there's Songhai. Let me go back and show you the difference. So there's Mali. And so Songhai is just a little bit bigger, but they also control Timbuktu and a lot of this Niger River right here. Okay. And this area that they're located in, so it's just below the Sahara. So one thing to mention, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai will benefit from where they are located. None of them produce salt or gold. Salt is up here. Well, if I can, salt is up here and gold is down here. So they benefit because they can tax the trade. They're right there in the middle. In fact, in many cases, they don't even speak the language of the people who are trading, but they know how to tax that trade. Okay. And so, yeah, so that's something just to mention. And Songhai will be a very powerful state actually for a while. Like the Portuguese show up later with the age of exploration, and they're like, ooh, we don't want to trade with them, like they're Muslim. And so we'll learn more about that. And so one thing I think I have to mention here, let me put myself down. Okay, I wanted to make sure that I mention this, that women in West Africa will have unheard of privileges in the Islamic world. They do not veil. Okay, and they interact with men like out in public. Like there's no, like men and women are treated rather equally over there in West Africa. In fact, you even will have very powerful women who will be queens. Okay, in some cases, you'll even have areas like over in here that will have matrilineal lines. So where wealth is passed down from mother to daughter. And so that's actually something really unique about West Africa. You have whole like dynastic groups, that are run by women. It's really quite fascinating. Okay, we had a lady come speak last year on this, and it was a really interesting topic. And then, okay, so I think This is the safest place to put myself. So the very last term is the Swahili coast. And so the Swahili coast is right here. See it? And it will, go back. And it will emerge around the year 1000. So honestly, like about the same time that the trans-Saharan trade is emerging, the Swahili coast is emerging. And the reason that it emerges is because there is a place right here called Zimbabwe, or Great Zimbabwe, and they produce a lot of gold. Okay, again, gold. And so we need to get this gold to the coast. And so the fastest way, you're going to have a lot of Arabs and Persians who migrate, who catch a ride on these monsoons, and who will settle here and establish city-states that will extract, so bring this gold, and in some cases ivory, in some cases slaves. Okay, so bring this to the coast and trade across the Indian Ocean. So the Swahili coast is made up of city-states. The main faith there is Islam, because they are the ones who are arriving. And the Swahili language is a mixture of African languages, which are called like Bantu, with an Arabic script. And so that's actually what the Swahili language is. So it's kind of like a mixture of all these things. And yes, so this is the Swahili coast, okay, which will be very important. And then one thing just to mention up here, so you have Ethiopia, which I think we kind of mentioned, but so Ethiopia will always be a powerful Christian outpost. And so this is what their churches look like, which are really cool because they're like underground. Do you see that? Isn't it fascinating how they just like carved that out of the rock? And so these Ethiopian rulers will trace their lineage back to the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. And so so they have a strong royal line who have ties back millennia to the line of Jesus. Okay. And so, yes, it's a strong Christian presence in Ethiopia, even as Islam diffuses across the Sahara. And eventually, most of Africa will adopt Islam. It will take some time, but Ethiopia will remain that Christian outpost. Okay, so we have answered all the terms. Okay, the guiding question, I listed several innovations, so hopefully you've answered that. And we've got videos that we went through. Next time is our test, and you're going to do amazing on this test. Make sure you study the blueprint, and there should be a Quizlet as well. All right, good luck.